Hey guys, in my last video about balancing the game, I mentioned that the devs kind of implied in this post right here that they're looking to maybe in the next update balance the game, which would be really exciting for us. So in that last video, I talked about the 16 different classes and how the devs could make different changes to balance those classes. And in this video, I'm going to talk about all of the weapons of Frostborn and how the devs can make a few tweaks to end up balancing these weapons, because obviously our option in weapons makes a big difference in how they interact with the classes that we are using. I've already given some of my opinions about balancing weapons to the devs. I think that pretty much all of these weapons in the gray area are perfect. The only thing that I think is very imbalanced is the rusty knife that requires 3 iron ingots to make. I realize it allows you to use some really cool skills like the horse on the rogue and some other abilities, but in reality, even with that, the rusty knife has the worst DPS in the game. Actually, right now it says that the DPS is 14. And the spear's DPS is 15. So it's got a worse DPS than the spear, and it requires 3 iron ingots versus, some stone and some wood to make. So I think that making the rusty knife is unbalanced, but other than that, I think all of the gray weapons are great. The green weapons, I think all should have, more durability. I think they should maybe have double durability. I want them to make it worth it to use green weapons in Odin's, because I think that using green weapons and like quilted gear is the perfect level to make Odin's the most fun. In my opinion, when I'm using quilted gear and green weapons, Odin's is the most fun. Anything more than that, it's a little easy. Anything less than that, it's kind of a grind. And so in my opinion, they should increase the durability of all green weapons, or at least all melee green weapons, so that Odin's has that magical amount of funness. So it's not necessarily a balance of the game. It has more to do with that we use more green weapons in stuff like Odin's. As far as blue weapons, I have 2 that I really think that the devs need to fix. The dragon staff is kind of weak. I think that the inconsistency of not knowing when you are going to do burning damage and when you are is too weak. I think that they just need to pick an amount and say you always get this amount of burning damage. It may be less than, obviously than the fire bow or one of those things, but just make something consistent. Freya staff is super powerful, but again, my bias is that if it's a support item, then you can make it super powerful, because you want to give support characters that motivation to keep playing, that's supporting their friends. So I'd keep the Freya staff just as it is. The poison bow, now that they've nerfed the poison bow, I think it's perfect how it is. I think they should keep it exactly how it is. The frostbow is super, the damage is reduced by a lot, so I would say that you could keep the frostbow the way it is. But honestly, what I would do if I were the devs is I might even increase the frostbow damage a little bit, but I would make it to where it only reduces how much movement you do by like 10%. So I might increase the damage just a little bit, but then I would reduce how much it slows people, because having a bow to be able to shoot so far and slow someone is kind of inherently OP. It's okay because the frostbow does so little damage, we don't feel it that much, but it just feels OP. Whereas the Ice Fang is worthless because you don't know when you're gonna slow your enemy. And in my opinion, a melee weapon with a slow on it needs to be far more powerful than a ranged weapon with a slow on it. It doesn't make any sense. You're having to do all that extra work to get right next to them. If you can't guarantee to stick with them and stay with them like you can the frostbow, then what's the point of having a slow weapon? I literally just donate all of my Ice Fangs to Odin's, because what is the point of having a sword you can't rely on? And so in my opinion, they need to make the Ice Fang a guaranteed slow, and it needs to be more than the ice bow, the frost bow. I think it should be like 40%. In League of Legends, there's a weapon that it slows people by a certain amount, and I don't know if it's still this way, but it used to be to where if you crafted it into a ranged weapon, it would reduce people's movement speed by 20%, whereas if you made it into a melee weapon, it would reduce people's movement speed by 40%. And that felt really balanced to me, because if you're going to do all that extra work to get close to someone and hit them with a melee weapon, you got to make sure it really sticks them so you can keep hitting them with that melee weapon. So that's my opinion. I think the Ice Fang needs to slow them by like 40%. It needs to be a guaranteed slow. And if they did that, then it still wouldn't guarantee that a Berserk or someone was able to stick with those ranged characters, but it would make it at least worth it if they didn't get stunned, if they didn't get bola'd by those archers, if basically the archer didn't have any way of stopping them from moving long enough for them to lose that slow, then it would be a really good weapon for warriors. So I just think that the Ice Fang and the Frostbow shows a continued bias that the devs seem to have towards archers. The archers have the best weapons. They've got the Firebow, which is the best weapon. The Frostbow is so much better than the Ice Fang. The warrior classes seem to be kind of weak in PvP compared to the archer classes, which are all very powerful in PvP. So I think the devs just need to reevaluate, how do you view range versus melee? Because melee is gonna naturally be harder. You have so much less mobility because of range, and so you've got to give them advantages other places. And if it's the Ice Fang and Frostbow is a great example of how the devs, that doesn't make any sense. You can't make the Frostbow, the one that has all the range and all the mobility, have the better slow than the sword. That just doesn't make any sense. They need to balance that. Okay, so moving on to purple weapons. Skull's Claw is embarrassing. Okay, it is the lowest, one of the lowest DPSs out of all purple weapons. In fact, besides the Protector Spear, and the Hell Staff, it is the lowest. And you get that 10% bonus to players, which is also done because 5% of 52.5 is like nothing. And what adds insult to injury is the Skull Claws are the hardest weapon to get by actually playing the game. It's the hardest weapon to get in the game. It just doesn't make any sense that the Skull Claws would not be buffed a lot. In my opinion, this is the hardest weapon to get in the game. It should be at least as good as a Firebow. You can see here that the Firebow does 54.7 plus 10 damage per second of true damage. So that's like the equivalent of like 70 or 80 damage per second when you're dealing with people wearing purple gear. It's a lot of extra damage. So I think that the Skull Claws should be a little bit closer to like the Cutter of Grey Clan, where it's like 62 point, maybe make it just an even 60 damage per second, like the 5-shot crossbow, and then give it that extra 10%. That's gonna put it, close to the Wrath Staff as far as damage goes, which actually, no, I would say it needs to be even more than the Wrath Staff, because the Wrath Staff, again, is a ranged weapon. So if you want to make it comparable, the Skull Claw should be, even more damage than the Wrath Staff. I would say maybe make it around 70 damage per second, and that DPS would be enough to be worthy of being the hardest weapon to get in the game. That's I guess the emphasis that I keep having is people are still going to use the Fire Dagger as the assassin because you get that 5 times sneak attack, but for the Bandit, the Thrasher, and the Berserk, it's the hardest weapon to get in the game. It should be the best weapon for at least those 3 classes that it would be ideal for. But right now it's pretty much worthless. The Protector Spear is exactly where it needs to be. It is kind of considered the pay-to-win weapon, and so it's kind of nice that it is a weaker of the purple class weapons. Now, if they wanted to make the Protector Spear do an extra 20% damage to enemies, kind of like, the Instigator gear is already kind of geared towards players or towards enemies, I think great. Make the Protector Spear an awesome PvE weapon, but I love it exactly where it's at. It's a good weapon. Giant's Hammer, great weapon. I don't think it needs to be changed at all. It's kind of, this is the one weapon that I think, you know what, it's kind of fun that you don't know if it's gonna stun them or not. It's kind of a wild card weapon. You're like, it's like this could go really well, or it could totally be a flop. It's kind of one of those wild card weapons, and so I really like the Giant Hammer how it is. Same thing with the Cutter of Grey Clan. It is such a good weapon in conjunction with the Fire Dagger. The Grey Clan does 62.5 DPS, which is amazing, and the Fire Dagger does only 55.6, but the Fire Dagger has those crazy bonuses to sneak attacks and does that extra 3 damage per second of burning damage. So they're just the perfect dance of those two weapons, and so I really like the way they have those two weapons set up. The Nord Sword and Shield is perfect, exactly how it is. It is an extremely powerful weapon, and if the devs were ever going to add a new fire weapon for the warrior class, and they wanted to add a new sword and shield that was even better than the Nord Sword and Shield, I would actually keep the numbers a little bit lower, make it do a little bit less damage, make it do a little bit less blocking, maybe the same amount of blocking, but then make it to where the shield makes you immune to fire and poison damage, which would of course make it a really powerful weapon. So like maybe it's a fire weapon and it makes you immune to fire damage, or it's a poison weapon, you're immune to poison damage, or both. But the point is, it would make you a lot tankier, but you would have to weigh the cost, because the Nord Sword and Shield might be better against a Ras Staff, whereas the new weapon would be, of course, better against a fire bow. So I think that would be my suggestion if they ever add a new one. The Cleaver is an awesome weapon. Doing that spread, that cone damage, is awesome. It's got a good DPS on it. I wouldn't change anything about it. Dragon Bow is a very high DPS weapon. I think they could actually increase the DPS just a little bit, make it to where eventually people have to want to choose, would I go for the Dragon Bow because they've got some immunities to fire damage, and so it's actually going to be better than my fire bow. But what's weird about this is I thought the Dragon Bow's damage was a little bit higher, so I need to check on that. These numbers might be outdated. Sometimes we forget to update it with an update. Yeah, because the 5-shot crossbow, I'm pretty sure, does not do higher DPS than the Dragon Bow, so we need to check these numbers. But again, Dragon Bow, 5-shot crossbow, I wouldn't change anything about them. They're really powerful weapons. They don't need anything tweaked. The fire bow, on the other hand, is incredibly overpowered. The Dispel potion does counter it, but that's a very expensive potion for 5 seconds. I mean, the fact that Dispel potions are so valuable right now, even more valuable than a damage reflect potion, and you can actually make them, is indicative to the idea that the fire bow has kind of made us all desperate for Dispel potions. And even then, it's just a 5-second window, which if you use it well, but my suggestion would be to nerf the burn damage to just like 8 damage per second for 2 seconds, or basically just enough to make it more balanced, because right now the fire bow is the best weapon in the game, and it's also got that range, that extra mobility from range. It just needs to be nerfed a little bit. Now, some of you might say, well, the poison bow does 7 poison damage per second. That would only make it 1 extra damage above the poison bow, and they could maybe nerf that 1 if they wanted to. But the truth is, the reason the fire bow is so powerful is because it has really high DPS in conjunction with also having its extremely high burn damage. And so if you lower the burn damage, the fire bow is still going to be so much better than the poison bow because it also has that really high DPS. So you could reduce the poison damage of the poison bow a little bit, but honestly, even just that 1, but then you also have the high DPS, the fire bow is still going to be the best weapon in the game, even at 8 burn damage per second. It's just going to make it to where it doesn't melt people so quickly. And really, you got to be careful when you're dealing with true damage and it ignores armor. It's going to just have inflated results. And so when you see a protector with, you know, full gear and in armor potions and all of these things, and a firebow just melts it, it kind of shows this something's a little bit wrong with this. The Hell Staff is awesome as it is. I wouldn't change anything about it. You know, maybe tweak some numbers on the Shaman or the Sorcerer, but the Hell Staff itself is great as it is. The Reaper Staff is a great low tier purple weapon. I wouldn't change anything about it. It's got good DPS. It's, you know, it's not nearly as good as a Wrath Staff, which means a lot of people won't use it, but it's a good one in there. And then the Wrath Staff is very powerful, but the way they've balanced things, I've already mentioned in the last video how, you know, the Fire Mage could be nerfed just a tad bit, but honestly it's pretty balanced. So I would keep the Wrath Staff exactly like it is. And then if they wanted to add a new weapon that was either a poison weapon or a fire weapon for the mage, then again I would make the DPS lower than it, just like they did with the Firebow and Dragon Bow, or the Fire Dagger and the Grey Cutter, and they so lower the damage, the DPS, but then add that extra fire or poison damage to make that staff, you know, do a little bit of extra true damage, but not too much, because true damage can really mess up the balance of the game. I remember in League of Legends I used to play ADC and I was Vayne, and at one point she had so much true damage I could melt tanks so fast, and they ended up nerfing her, but it was like I would just do click, 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 and I mean within 6 shots, and I would shoot like a machine gun, and they would just be like, their health would just evaporate. And it was because I could just manipulate the true damage so much that, and it was a percentage of their health as well, which was just, it was just ridiculous. And so they of course nerfed her because it messed with the balance of the game. And so I think the devs need to be careful with true damage, because it's going to mess with the balance of the game. So that's it for balancing weapons. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you guys have any suggestions for balancing weapons, make sure to put it in the comments of this video, and then like the comments of everyone else so that the devs can see it and hopefully make some of these changes in that balance update.